If the intent is for Mike Sainristil to move back inside on the Commanders' defense, and that means the team needs somebody else to play opposite of Marshon Lattimore, our top 7 draft candidates for that job right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday. Your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, part of Sports Illustrated's host of sites, and also locally for your CBS affiliate, WUSA9.com, helping out with their digital coverage of the team. I want to thank you for coming through today. And today we are going to continue our big board series with the perimeter cornerback position. Insiders wanted to talk corner. The question is, are we talking corners through the lens of Mike Sainristil staying outside or moving back inside where he started? Insiders predominantly, mostly believe that Mike Sainristil is going to be moving back inside. So we're looking at perimeter corners. If you love slot corners, don't worry. We are going to talk slot corners again, or at another episode later on here before we get to the NFL draft. Every day, as those of you who come through for every single episode, you already know I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. A special thank you to you for coming through every day, and for everybody out there. If you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. And if you're new to the show, I'm glad you found us. Hopefully you stick around. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast, so come back 5 days a week, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So make sure you take advantage of that at America's #1 sportsbook. Next up in our big board series is the cornerback position. We've already done explosive running backs. We've also done pass rushing edge defenders. Now we're going to talk about corners. But again, the question was, what type of corner? We're looking for perimeter corners for the Washington Commanders in case they plan on moving Mike Sainristil back inside. Of course, second year cornerback Mike Sainristil, drafted last year in the second round out of the Michigan Wolverines program, was brought in to be that slot defender. That's where he started off his NFL career. But because of things transpiring, he ended up having to move inside. The Washington Commanders started last year with Benjamin St-Juste and Emmanuel Forbes starting outside, although Mike Davis was kind of expected to challenge for one of those positions. Mike Sainristil was inside, and then they ended up with Marshon Lattimore after the trade. Of course, that was late in the season more than anything, and Mike Sainristil outside. Noah Igbenogany took over inside once Mikey moved outside. All three of those players are back. Lattimore, Sainristil, Igbenogany, they're all back on the team. Emmanuel Forbes is with the Rams. Benjamin St-Juste is with the Chargers, so they're both in Los Angeles. The team last year overall was one of the best when it came to preventing explosive pass plays to opponents. Of course, explosive pass plays are pass plays that gain 20 yards or more. They don't have to be air yards, 20 yards or more. They just have to gain 20 yards or more. So it could be a 5-yard behind the line of scrimmage forward pass. As long as it's a forward pass and then it gains 20 yards, it's an explosive pass. The Commanders defense did a really good job of containing those against opponents last year. They were about middle of the pack when it came to giving up passing touchdowns. Ranked 30th in interceptions, not good. Tied for the most defensive pass interference penalties in the league, which of course isn't always a cornerback situation, right? To be fair, but secondary-wise, they did rank pretty high there. In DPIs, also gave up one of the lowest completion percentage to opponents, and were 28th in the NFL, allowing 61.9% of passes to be completed. So a little bit of kind of like a hot and cold thing, right? Like not a lot of passes being completed, not a lot of touchdowns, relative to the rest of the league, but a whole lot of penalties, not a lot of deep balls, but also not a lot of takeaways. And that all led to the passer rating that the Commanders defense allowed being kind of middle of the road. I think what that really stems from is the lack of takeaways specifically. So when we're building a Commanders outside cornerback big board, I think you're going to give a boost to guys that have ball production, right? Ball skills. At least you want some interceptions. But even if you can get some forced incompletions, those are incompletions that, again, some of them are batted balls, tip balls, things like that. But it's just something that Pro Football Focus, whose stats we're going to be using, or measurements, analytics we're going to be using for this, just kind of give credit to that cornerback for being the reason the pass fell incomplete. But what are we looking at overall? Every single episode in this series, this big board series, we're going to have a minimum qualifier. And for the cornerback, especially the perimeter cornerback, our minimum qualifier thing needs to be at least 6 feet tall. And that's actually just a little bit conservative. Like, you go back to the Dan Quinn defenses, specifically in Dallas, more than anything, because it's just most recent. And a lot of his corners, especially on the outside, are 6'2", some are 6'3". He kind of likes the taller, longer type of corner, and that's where a lot of the people in the league are going to. So, and that's why a lot of insiders believe that 5'8" Mike Sainristil probably not going to stay outside by design. You know what I mean? Now, if it happens again because it's necessary, then so be it. But if the team has kind of their preference and their ability to fulfill their own preference, Mikey Sainristil is probably moving inside. So 6 foot tall, that's what we're kind of looking at. And then we got to do this again because I think it communicated some things more clearly on our pass rusher episode. Didn't do this in our running back episode, so I want to do it here. Travis Hunter, Colorado star wide receiver / corner. He says he wants to play both sides. Not getting anywhere near 29, right? Again, unless something incredibly dramatic happens from now to next weekend, he's not getting anywhere near 29. If Adam Peters trades up to the range to get Travis Hunter, in order to get Travis Hunter, like in order to target a corner, it's going to be obvious that Travis Hunter. Throw out the big board. The big board is Travis Hunter, right? The big board, if he trades up to say pick number 3, which is about where you need to get to, the big board is Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and that's it. Like, which one of those two guys are you trading up to get, right? So it's a one-man big board there for the cornerback position, so he's not even going to be here. He's 6'1", clearly meets the criteria, but he's not going to be on this big board. Guys like Jahdae Barron out of Texas, who's 5'11", also not going to be here. Most likely going to be playing in the slot in the National Football League. He does have outside corner experience, so if you want to say to me, but he could be an outside corner, you're 100% correct. But he's also projected to be going about 10 picks or so before the Commanders get on the clock as well. So we're going to leave Jahdae Barron off of here as well. So who does make our watch list? Well, there's one player that some of you might hear what I just said and say, but why is he on the list? And that's Will Johnson out of Michigan. I'm going to tell you right now, the reason that Will Johnson is going to be on our list of available corners is because there is some talk, some concern that some teams might be worried about, one, his injury history, expensive time last year due to injuries, but also his speed. Not known for having the long speed, right? If he loses early, he just kind of loses. You need top coverage there, and a lot of teams like to play single high coverage sometimes, and the Commanders specifically like to do that. So there is a possibility that Will Johnson might be available. 29, I think, is a stretch, but there was a recent Sports Illustrated column about kind of like dream scenarios for teams, and basically Will Johnson being within range for Adam Peters to move up and go get. And I know a lot of people here would flinch at the thought of Adam Peters moving up, because that means obviously you're giving up more draft capital than you've already given up. But, if he loves Will Johnson and he makes it to, I don't know, say 22, maybe you could see Adam Peters pull a move off and go get, back-to-back years, go get a Michigan cornerback. You know what I mean? So Will Johnson is going to be on the list. So 17 players total is what we studied. Again, 3 games minimum for each of them watched on tape. I watched more tape on some of these guys just if I had questions. There's one guy with the first-round projection that I already know some of you are not going to appreciate where I put him on the big board, and I'm sorry, but I think I watched 5 or 6 games of his tape, so we'll get to that. But we're going to make our top 7 just like we do every other position group in this series, just like we will every other position group. So in that group of 17 players, what are we looking for? We got some measurables that I can share with you data-wise that help kind of represent what I saw on the tape. We're talking 40 times. We're talking verticals at pro days or at NFL scouting combine. Then we're looking at some statistics to quantify what you get in this player. TDs allowed, interceptions, reception percentage when targeted, and force interception or force incompletion percentage. Are the things that we're going to kind of look at. We're going to give people a plus, a little bit of a bump for guys that played a good amount of man coverage. And we're talking 30% or more man coverage, because the Washington Commanders played a lot of man. Noah Igbenogany, Benjamin St-Juste, Mikey Sainristil, all finished top 22 in the NFL in man coverage percentage among the 100 top cornerbacks in coverage snaps, okay? Marshon Lattimore finished 46th. He only played 12 games. The highest Saints cornerback was ranked 35th. So 12 games, ranked 46th. A lot of man coverage playing for the Commanders. We're also going to give a bump to guys who did the bench and did well in the bench. 14 or more reps is considered pretty good for a cornerback in the bench game. Not a huge bump, but we are going to give him a little bit of a bump, because if you have that physical upper body strength and ability, even if you're not necessarily known as a press corner coming out of college, good coaching, good strength in your upper body, you should be able to become a good press corner with the right type of instruction. So that's the criteria here, what we're looking for in this cornerback big board. Let's get down to the dirty details of it, crafting our top 7 outside cornerbacks for the Washington Commanders in this year's NFL draft. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today in part thanks to our friends over at Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, DoorDash? If you're me, it's DoorDash. It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal chief financial officer, giving you full visibility and control over your finances, even if you have a CFO. My wife is the COO, and that encompasses our finances along with our LLC. We're a very small LLC, and even she uses Monarch Money. So even if you have a CFO, someone who manages your budget really well, Monarch Money can still help you because it's more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track everything, accounts, investments, all your spending in one place, so you can stop just managing your money and start hopefully building some wealth. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Continuing now with our episode, today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks for coming through. Here are our top 7 cornerbacks, and we're going to talk about. There's a couple of ways we went about this, right? So listen, we've talked about this before. Every day as you've heard this, anybody that talks about the draft extensively is going to tell you tape. Tape does everything. So this group was very interesting because in the other groups, in the explosive running back group, in the pass rushing edge group, the data kind of clearly identified who the best quote unquote NFL prospects were on tape as well. But cornerback is a little bit more of a dependent position, right? Because if you're only targeted, let's say you have a really good cornerback out there, so the quarterbacks that face him only throw screen passes towards him. Well, technically he's being targeted. That's his guy. You're being targeted, so the completion percentage against you might be a little bit higher. Or you don't get thrown at very much, your interception totals might get higher. I'm not telling you guys anything that most of you don't already know. If a cornerback doesn't see a lot of action, they can't produce a lot of stats, right? I know there were some Commanders fans who came out of the New Orleans Saints game last year specifically, disappointed with Marshon Lattimore. Said, I didn't hear his name. He didn't do anything. Expected more. Truth of the matter is the Saints not only never threw at him, they never ran at him. Like, they just didn't go towards Marshon Lattimore. That's how much they respected him, knowing him from being on their team. They just straight up didn't challenge him. Now, of course, later on in the season, the Eagles challenged him, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly there was some disappointment associated with his performance anyway. But against the Saints specifically, it's kind of hard to fault a guy for no tackles, no PBUs, no interceptions, none of that stuff, no splash plays, no highlights, when the opposing offense literally is just staying away from him at all costs. So based on quantifiable data and measurables, of our 17 corners that we evaluated, here are the top 7. Darien Porter, Iowa State, came in number 1 in this category. He was second in the 40 time of the tested group, ran a 4.3, great 40 time. Tied for third in the vertical, which is great, 36.5 inches. First in touchdowns allowed last year because didn't allow any. There were a few corners on here who didn't allow any touchdowns last year. Tied for 5th in interceptions with 3 of them. First in reception percentage against, only 29.4% of passes thrown his way were completed. And he was second in forced interception percentages with 24%. So those are all great numbers. Darien Porter, however, not our number 1 corner when we get to the final part of the big board, because that's where the data looks really good. You don't get me wrong, we're going to use that data, and that data certainly does show up on tape when you watch Darien Porter play. Like, you see 24% of the passes thrown his way get broken up by him. The incompletion happens because of something he does. The reception amount, less than 30%. You see that happen, of course, on tape, but it's why it happens on tape. And that's what we'll talk about here as we get through this. So Darien Porter, number 1, when you just go by kind of the scoring, right? He hits 11 stars. I've got a star system that I use that we're not going to break down completely here on the show, but he ranks number 1 on there in that star system. However, there are other guys like, say, Will Johnson, for example, who finishes on this list 13th, and he's certainly clearly not the 13th cornerback on this list when you talk about a big board, but didn't work out the scouting combine, didn't work out as pro day. And then when you look at stats, right, he didn't allow any touchdowns, only had 2 interceptions, but the other numbers, not all that great. He only played until October. Then he suffered a turf toe injury, ended up missing the rest of the season. So a lot of his other numbers, not all that great. doesn't give him a lot of points, doesn't move him up there. In fact, only finished with 3 points, with the same amount of Kobe Bryant out of Kansas, also Melo Dotson out of Kansas, 2 guys that are not first-round projected picks in this year's NFL draft. So those types of things kind of skew them, but we still have some impressive numbers. And you know, I know some of these guys don't get a lot of press, so I do want to kind of talk about them. So Darien Porter out of Iowa State, we already talked about. But Zah Frazier, another guy out of UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, not a major program, but he finished third in the 40, ran a 4.36 40, 36.5-inch vert, really good. Only gave up 1 touchdown all last season, had 6 interceptions. Meanwhile, last season, did allow 47.4% completion rate, which is 6th best in this group, so not terrible, but not, you know, great either, and was 3rd in forcing completion. So he does make a lot of plays on the ball. And then there's a guy like Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. 4.28 40, lightning fast. You love the 40. 39.5-inch vert, you love the elevation. No touchdowns allowed, you love that. 7th in interceptions. It had 1 interception last year. You'd love to see more ball production. Did have 18% of the passes thrown his way broken up by him, so you love that type of thing. But I'm telling you right now, and Maxwell Hairston is that guy. He is that first-round projection. You know, he's gotten a first, second-round projection. You know, some people have him going day 2, but he's got I'm talking about. He's not very high on our board, even though he comes in 3rd on this list. He's not very high on the board. I'll get into the reasons why, because I know a lot of people, or at least a good amount of Commanders fans, there are a good amount of you who like him and want him on the team. And I'm going to tell you why I disagree. Trey Amos out of Ole Miss comes in 4th, tied with Noel Williams and also Zy Alexander of LSU. So those guys are kind of all matched very, very similarly when you talk about the physical attributes and you talk about the production, right? 4.43 40 for Trey Amos. Is very good. But then you have Noel Williams, who comes in with a 33.5-inch vert, 7 interceptions. You love that production. Zy Alexander, only 2 interceptions, but he also was responsible for breaking up 33% of the passes that were thrown his way, while a guy like Trey Amos broke up 35.5% of the passes thrown his way. So there's a lot of good talent. I think that's really kind of the end of the day, the end picture here. The reason we went through 17 cornerbacks, because there's a lot of good ones. Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State didn't really rank very high on the list from a numbers and a production standpoint, right? So the tape is going to tell a lot of his story as well. Finished 8th here. Benjamin Morrison is a guy that I know has a lot of fans out there. He finishes 9th on here and honestly doesn't get climbed up the board all that much from the tape study. So let's get into the details of how we created this top 7 list and why a guy like Hairston out of Kentucky doesn't rank very highly on the top 7 list, even though he ranks very highly on the measurements and the production. And a guy like Will Johnson, who you really don't have any production and any measurements from in 2024 specifically, ranks highly, even though you don't have any of that data. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that in part thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. So looking at the NBA Finals odds right now before we get to the actual playoffs, the Oklahoma City Thunder are currently your favorites, plus 185 odds to win the whole stinking tournament. The Boston Celtics are next at plus 190. After that, there's a pretty good gap, 300 point gap between the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers at plus 490. After that, you get into the thousands, 1,600, plus 1,600 odds for the Los Angeles Lakers. My Denver Nuggets, tragic, y'all. Just tragic what has gone on with the Denver Nuggets ever since they won the championship, plus 3,500 odds. The Minnesota Timberwolves, honestly, even though they're conference rival, all that stuff of the Denver Nuggets, really like Anthony Edwards, plus 5,000 odds, so not getting very good odds there. Of course, you go wild if you want to and take the Chicago Bulls at plus 100,000 odds. So those are some interesting odds. So whatever you want to do in relation to the NBA playoffs, don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com, claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're stacking and racking top seven perimeter cornerback options for the Washington Commanders. Mike Sainristil, if he's going to move back inside, or if the intention is for him to move back inside, the Washington Commanders certainly brought in some free agents. They brought in some guys, you know what I mean? Noah Igbenogany has experience outside, all those things. But there's not a guy opposite of Marshon Lattimore that you just look at and say, this dude's your starter. This is your outside guy. no matter what. And we know the Commanders love competition anyway. So we talked about some of the stats that ended up ranking these guys 1 through 7. And again, we'll kind of go through just the names one more time. Darien Porter out of Iowa State was number 1, followed by UTSA, Zaw Frazier, Maxwell Harrison out of Kentucky. 3rd, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, and Noel Williams out of Cal. All tying for 4th was Zy Alexander out of LSU. And then tying for 7th, we had Dorian Strong, Virginia Tech, and Jason Marshall out of Florida. That was your top 7. It actually ends up being more than 7 players. I think it's 8 players because we have ties. But that is not what our final 7 big board looks like, because, of course, tape does matter. When you look at a guy like Will Johnson out of Michigan, who's not in that top 7, when you look at the numbers, didn't work out the combine, didn't work out at his pro day because he's dealing with a hamstring injury. There's 2 sides of that coin. One, are you going to draft a guy in the first round who hasn't been healthy in almost a year? I mean, almost a year is a little bit extreme. October is when he suffered the injury. So you drafted him in April, but you're not going to see him, on the field in May. If he can't work out with pro day, is he going to be able to work out with your rookie mini camp? Is he going to be ready for training camp? Right? Like, there's all these questions, and certainly plenty of medical people have looked at him. Right? Or are you going to draft a guy in the first round who doesn't need to be an immediate competitor? Right? Like the Washington Commanders, we've heard them talk about, bringing in people to compete right now, but also this team is trying to build this team for the long future. So are you willing to roll the dice on a guy like Will Johnson, who may not be able to participate in camp right away, kind of like Johnny Newton, may not even be able to participate in training camp right away? Hamstrings are a very, very sensitive thing. And I've been told by other people in the business that, like, really you need like 3 months off to really get a hamstring healed. Like, guys miss 2 weeks and then come back with a hamstring. That hamstring's not healed. They're just to the point where they think they can manage it enough that dude can play. You know what I mean? So Will Johnson, depending on where he is in this hamstring recovery and all that stuff, he may need to miss mini camp, OTAs, you know what I mean? Some of that stuff. He'll be on hand, but he may not be able to do reps, right? So these are all questions that you have to ask yourself if you're the Washington Commanders. And I think that when you look at Will Johnson, the little bit you see in 2024, especially what you see in 2023, winning the national championship with Mike Sainristil and those guys, he's worth it, man. Like at number 29, we may not have all the data and the quantifiable numbers for me to spit at you, and it sounds really impressive and all that stuff. When you turn on the tape and you watch Will Johnson, and because we're watching old tape, I watched multiple. I didn't just watch 3. I watched at least a handful of games on him. It's there. Now, there is also concern about his deep speed, right? And I think that's fair. That's another reason why there's some people who think he might slide a little bit. Now, is that slide going to be to 25? Is that slide going to be to 19, right? Like, there's projections all over the board for Will right now. But I think you do need to include him because there are some concerns out there about him. Teams didn't get to see him work out. So if they're a little iffy on him, if they're just fixated on, we got to be able to see you, then he might fall off their board a little bit too. So if he gets to 29 and Will Johnson is there, I think Will Johnson is clearly the number 1 receiver cornerback on your list. Number 2 is going to be Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Number 3 is going to be Darien Porter out of Iowa State. This is where Darien Porter, our number 1 guy when it came to the stats and measurables, he's going to fall down a little bit to number 3 overall. Number 4 is going to be Azareye'h out of Florida State. Number 5, Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina. Number 6, Noel Williams out of Cal. Number 7, Zaw Frazier out of UTSA. So, number 1, Will Johnson, 6'2", 194-pound cornerback out of Michigan, first-round projection. Again, no workout at the combine, no workout at pro day because of a hamstring injury. Missed a lot of 2024 with injuries as well. Didn't allow any touchdowns last year. Didn't play a lot last year. And had 2 interceptions. Was injured in October. So the ball production, like if you extrapolate that data, which is a little bit unfair because you can't do that as well with corners as you can with some other positions. Either way, you're looking at he's on pace for about 5 or 6 interceptions. Upside, football IQ, shows up on tape, good feet in press and off coverage. Very comfortable in either one. His minus, long speed. We just talked about it a little bit. And then injuries, of course. What do the medicals say? If you get him in for a top 30, what do your doctors say? Things like that. Second guy on our list, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, everydayers. I've already told you this is one of my favorite cornerbacks in this year's class, and he's just one of those dudes that kind of looks like a commander, right? 6'1", 195 pounds, second-round projection right now. 4.43 340, not lightning fast, but certainly not slow. Only allowed 2 touchdowns in coverage last year, had 3 interceptions, broke up 35.5% of the passes sent his way. You love those ball skills between the interceptions and then forcing those incompletions. You love all of that. Plus sides or upside to him, experience. He's played for multiple teams. He's very physical cornerback. Hesitates sometimes in zone. And the bottom line is, even for teams that play a lot of man, it's relative. It's, you know what I mean? It's not above 50%. Like, no defense is in man more than 50% of the time in the NFL. So he's going to have to play zone 70% of the time or so, right? Maybe 65% of the time. So that is something he's going to have to work on. Not great in run support either. So again, how heavily that's weighed inside the Commanders' war room will certainly impact the way that they go about things. I'm more interested in my corner just being able to funnel plays back inside than specifically making the play. You love him to make the play, but if you at least have the intelligence to funnel back inside, which he does show on tape. Our third guy, Darien Porter, Iowa State. He was our first guy when it came to just the measurables and the stats, but he falls down to third when it comes to tape study. 6'3", 195 pounds, third round projection. Second in the 40, ran a 4.340. You love that height, that height speed combination along with his wingspan. He's got a big wingspan. I mean, you love all those things, right? You just love all those things. Definitely worth third round pick if he makes it there. Third in the vert, 36.5-inch vert, no touchdowns allowed, 3 interceptions last year. Also has special teams ability for the NFL. So you're getting a third round corner who, means he needs a little bit of time to develop before you can really put him on the field consistently. You're at least going to get special teams contributions at him. Some downside to him, only a 1-year starter in college, very zone heavy scheme that he played in as well. So a little bit of projection there in the man playing, more man than usual. Fourth guy, Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. 6'1.5", 197 pounds, second round projection. There is some late first round. There's been some projections of the Commanders taking him at number 29. 0 touchdowns allowed, only 1 interception, though. You don't love the ball skills. Does allow some separation at the top of routes. He's got a really good wingspan, very disruptive early on in routes. But again, if the receiver is allowed to have time to get into his stem, get into his break, Azareye'h does give up some separation, which is why he falls down a little bit in this board. Siobhan Revelle is 5th on our board. East Carolina, 6'2", 194 pounds. First or second round, depending on who you're looking at the mock drafts. No workouts. Again, he's another guy who he had an injury towards ACL, should be ready for camp and all those things. But in his college camp before he suffered the injury, he did run a 4.4 that was reported. You know what I mean? So take that with a grain of salt. We didn't count it for the quote-unquote point charts and all that stuff. Allowed 1 touchdown, had 2 interceptions before he went down with the injury, and only allowed 38% of the passes targeted towards him to be completed. Very physical dude. Got length. He's got speed. Early break separation. Quick routes tend to get him, tend to work against him a little bit better. Ball skills, not super great. You do see the 2 interceptions in there. That's good, but his ball skills could certainly be a little bit better. Our 6th guy, Noel Williams out of Cal, 6 foot tall, 199 pounds. Right now, about a 3rd or 4th round projection. 6th in our vertical, 33.5 vert, 7 interceptions. Love the ball skills. 15% forced incompletions. 44.9% of his snaps last year came in man coverage. So he's a man cover guy, 6 foot tall, so he meets that requirement, right? 19 reps on the bench. So here's the thing. Not a lot of punch in his press, which I kind of have like PTSD from watching Manuel Forbes and Benjamin St. Juste play in press without a punch. So I hate seeing no punch in press, right? But he did 19 reps on the bench. I told you guys we're going to give a little bit of a bump to guys who do the bench and do well. That's really well for a cornerback to do 19 reps. So he's got the upper body strength. Now we just need to teach him if you're the Washington Commanders. So you like that combination there. Ball skills, again, 7 INTs, man. You can't fight that. That's great stuff. Za Frazier out of UTSA, 6'3", 186 pounds. 5th round projection right now. 3rd in the 40, 4.36. So this dude's 6'3", running a 4.36. He's got a wingspan like a bird. Got great ball skills. 6 interceptions last year. 21% of the passes thrown his way were forcing completions by Za. Za, honestly, like the big thing about him is he's very zone heavy. Doesn't have a lot of experience. That's why he's down here on the board, because I'll tell you right now, if he had more experience and he played a little bit more man, and if he wasn't playing at UTSA and had like maybe some better competition, if I'm just ranking how much I like these dudes, Za Frazier's like 5th. Okay, I like Za Frazier a lot. 8th on our list, our big board is going to be Dorian Strong, Virginia Tech. I'm going to go a little bit deeper here because we do need to talk about Maxwell Hairston, who finishes 9th on my big board. And this is where I can already see a comment. Can't believe you get paid for this. Me neither, bro. Can't believe I get paid to do this job either. Maxwell Hairston, 1st round projection. I see a lot of mocks where he's going 2nd round, whatever, early 2nd round, late 1st round, day 1, day 2 projection, right? 5'11" at the combine. So remember, I told you, like the prerequisite to be on this list is 6 feet tall. Depends on who you talk to on whether he's 6 feet or 5'11", right? So he's on the threshold there. 183 pounds, not a big frame. 1st round pick projection. Look, dude ran a 4.28 40, the fastest 40 of this group. 39.5-inch vert, biggest vert of this group. No touchdowns allowed. Did have an interception. 18% of the passes thrown his way were incomplete. Like, there's a lot there to that's hard to argue with, right? Looks comfortable in man zone on tape. He does. He looks comfortable. Had 3 pick sixes, in the last, dozen plus games. He's slender, you know what I mean? And he's short, like, relative to some of these other cornerbacks. I just don't feel like when I watch him, I just don't feel it. I just don't feel the Commander vibe, to be quite honest with you. Look, if they draft him, obviously, just like it reminds me a little bit of Emmanuel Forbes. Not that like their dimensions are the same or anything like that, but the production is what people would be drafting versus just the type of player. Like, players who are built like this typically don't have long or successful NFL careers, especially in the modern National Football League. Like, the biggest concern about him from some evaluators is how is he going to step up against some of the more physical receivers. I mean, you're in the NFC East with A.J. Brown, with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, the New York Giants already have Malik Neighbors. They might be going out and getting Travis Hunter. You know what I mean? Like, so when I look at Maxwell Harrison going up against these dudes, I'm just like, I don't see how it works out. I said the same thing about Emmanuel Forbes. Unfortunately, I was right. If they draft him, I'll do the same thing they did with Emmanuel. I'll go hunting why they drafted him. And again, there's some good stuff here. The 4.28 40 you love, 39.5-inch vert you love, things like that. But again, just being honest with you guys, it's just not going to sit well with me. Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame comes in 10th. Zy Alexander 11th. Jason Marshall 12th. Quincy Riley 13th. Denzel Burke out of Ohio State 14th. Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson, our 2 Kansas Jayhawks, are 15th and 16th. And O'Donnell Fortune out of South Carolina comes in 17th. And that wraps up our perimeter corner big board for the Washington Commanders. Our next episode, it is going to be Wednesday. It is mailbag day here on Locked On Commanders. So questions and comments are already coming in from insiders. If you have a question or a topic that you want discussed, just become a Locked On Commanders insider. You can text me your thought, your question. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez get you ready for the NFL Draft even more on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Before we go, this is not an advertisement, but I do want to give a little special thank you to New Era. New Era, if you're on YouTube, you can see this. If not, I will just describe it. They got some cool, fringe designs on the bill here. They sent me one of the new draft caps for the Washington Commanders this year. It's got Commanders on there, got the W logo, Washington, D.C. under it, and they sent me a pin that I presume is supposed to go on the hat. I don't know if you can see that, but it's in the shape of a hog. And if you are watching or listening to this show, I'm going to assume you know why. It's a hog, and I think it's really cool. I have not put it on the hat because I'm actually going to give this hat to one of my insiders at some point in the near future, maybe training camp, actually, not the total near future, but near enough. And I want to let them put the pin wherever they want to put it, whether it's on the hat or somewhere else. So I'm not going to put this pin on the hat, but really cool. New Era decided to send me that, and so I just want to give them thanks and show it to any of you who may not have seen it yet. Again, not an advertisement, not telling you to go buy it, but I wanted to share it with you because they shared it with me. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, so I can see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.